Hello, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us and welcome you to NCLR's virtual briefing, Ice Storm, Understanding Recent Immigration Attacks. My name is Imani Rupert-Gordon, and I'm the president at the National Center for LGBTQ Rights. The purpose of this briefing today is to explain the dire position and situation that we're in. We want to provide a broader legal context to what's happening right now and discuss the very real impacts that the attacks on immigration and asylum has on LGBTQ people and the clients who we work with every day. Most people know NCLR for our work in family law, Indian conversion therapy, or through our sports work, but our immigration and asylum project is one of NCLR's most long-standing programs, and it's existed for over 30 years. We represent LGBTQ people from around the world who live in areas where it is extremely dangerous to be LGBTQ. They face incredible violence or death because of their LGBTQ status. Our program started in 1994 when it became possible for LGBTQ people to seek asylum in this country. Because it had just become legal, no organizations were doing this work, and so NCLR became the first national LGBTQ legal organization to have an immigration and asylum program. On our 30th anniversary, we named our program Hogar, Legal and Practical Support for LGBTQ Immigrants. We are so proud to be able to do this work at a high level, and after representing hundreds of LGBTQ asylum applicants for over 3 decades, in all that time, NCLR has never lost an asylum case. With the most recent escalations under the Trump administration, the problem is not that we are losing these cases. Instead, this administration is robbing these individuals of due process, refusing to let their cases be heard at all, and shipping these vulnerable individuals who face severe human rights abuses because of their LGBTQ status to a range of countries who would harm LGBTQ people in places like Uganda, where LGBTQ people face the death penalty. Today, you're going to hear from some of NCLR's team who's going to tell you more about what's happening and how it's affecting LGBTQ people all over this country. It's critical to understand the scope of these immigration attacks. The media has not effectively shared what is happening on the ground for our community, and we're hoping to shed some light on that today. We are receiving calls from people that are panicked that their long-term partners are being told that they'll be shipped off without a hearing to a country where they're not from and will face the death penalty. The stakes of what we're facing cannot be overstated. And here to share more with you about this is Shannon Minter, NCLR's legal director, Amy Whelan, senior staff attorney, Ming Wong, director of community justice and access, and Cara Jobson, an incredible immigration attorney who's provided pro bono counsel for NCLR for years. Let's start off with Shannon to give us an overview of what's happening right now. Shannon, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Imani. And I just want to say, in my 30 years of being in NCLR, this is the worst, the most serious situation I've ever seen facing our community. Just when we see these headlines about ICE grabbing people off the streets, we have to understand that LGBTQ people are being swept up in that net, that the consequences for them are uniquely terrible. We see gay and transgender people who have valid asylum claims are being sent to countries where they face imprisonment, torture, death. I mean, this administration has created a system to bypass asylum hearings entirely through something called these third country transfer agreements. So the U.S. has signed agreements with Uganda, Honduras, Guatemala, Rwanda, Ghana, El Salvador, some others. So ICE attorneys, they file motions asking immigration judges to dismiss asylum claims without ever hearing them on the merits and to send people to these countries. As of early December, ICE had filed over 8,000 motions like that across the country. So the result here is that people who are fleeing persecution based on who they are in their home country never get to tell their story to a judge. And this is a huge betrayal of the right to asylum. It's one of the most fundamental principles that emerged after World War II. After The world witnessed the Holocaust and what happened when nations turned away refugees fleeing Nazi persecution. So countries around the world made a commitment like we're not ever going to send people back to countries where they face persecution. 1951 Refugee Convention, established that individuals have a human right to seek protection from another country when their own government either can't or will not protect them when they're being persecuted based on race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. And for decades now, the U.S. has recognized being sexual orientation or gender identity as being persecuted on those bases as grounds for asylum. So LGBTQ people fleeing violence, state-sponsored persecution, have been finding safety here. I mean, the U.S. has been really an important refuge for people that are persecuted in their home countries. And what's happening now is just a complete betrayal of that post-war promise. And we're going back to the policies, those same policies that cost so many people their lives in the 1930s and 40s. I really think we need to understand, and some of you do, I know, but we all need to understand what happens when someone is grabbed by ICE. I mean, people are being arrested at home, at work, on the street, increasingly at their own immigration court hearings and check-ins. There was a federal judge in a case recently that just described what happened to one asylum applicant, no criminal record. He showed up voluntarily for his court hearing. So masked ICE agents suddenly appeared. They separated him from his U.S. citizen siblings, detained him in a room with no bed or shower for 3 days, and then shipped him halfway across the country. And you have to understand, after you get grabbed and taken, ICE decides where you go, and they use that power very punitively. They send people far away from their families, from lawyers, from support networks. We now have the people in detention have grown to over 66,000 people. That is the highest ever recorded. Many are just being held in these like camps that they're thrown up. They're like tent camps. The biggest one is Camp East Montana. It's at Fort Bliss. They literally put it up on the same site where there was a former Japanese internment camp. And what happens there is horrific. This has been documented by human rights groups: beating, sexual abuse, rotten food, no soap, no hygiene, no very limited access to lawyers. And we also need to know you do not have a constitutional right to a lawyer in immigration court. There was a policy change back in July that eliminated bond hearings for most people. So a judge isn't even getting to review whether these asylum applicants should be released. More people died in ICE detention in 2025 than in the last 4 years combined. And then for LGBTQ people, it is often worse, especially transgender people. The administration has rescinded any protection for transgender detainees. So transgender women are being housed with men, being denied, and all transgender detainees are being denied medical care. And the countries that we have these agreements with are countries that criminalize being gay or transgender, and some of them impose the death penalty for that. Uganda imposes life imprisonment or the death penalty. Ghana, 3 years in prison just if you identify as gay. Honduras and Guatemala criminalize any kind of same-sex intimacy. Iran, the administration is deporting people directly back to Iran, where being gay, homosexuality is punishable by death. So we're sending people with asylum claims fleeing persecution in their own countries to countries where their very existence is criminalized and maybe subject them to death. I mean, there was a very good article in The Advocate recently that describes some particular cases with like a gay man from Morocco who's been detained for over a year. The government's trying to send him to Uganda. Two gay men from Iran that are in a relationship together. The U.S. was absolutely going to send them back to Iran where they would be put to death for being gay. And the only reason that was stopped is there was a measles outbreak that delayed them being sent back. Gay man from Ecuador who entered legally and got sent back last month. And he was seeking refuge from being persecuted in Ecuador. They sent him back to Ecuador. You got to understand, these are not people who broke any law. They entered through legal channels. They're showing up in court. They're checking in with ICE like they're required to do, and they're getting arrested, detained, and deported anyway. I want to to understand like the impossible situation that LGBTQ asylum seekers are in right now. Again, there people follow the rules, enter through legal channels. They're showing up for court dates, checking in with ICE as they're required to do, and increasingly showing up for those required appointments is what gets you detained and deported. So you just, I mean, think about that. You're required, legally required to appear. Appearing means you get grabbed and deported. If you skip the appointment, you are a fugitive. You show up, you're in detention. There's just no right answer here and nothing anything like due process. I mean, this is the law being not just like capricious and arbitrary. The law has now become just vicious towards our community. I just want to say gay men in particular are being targeted. They're easy targets. Our community needs to understand that what is happening here with this immigration crisis is a way that this administration is targeting and trying to destroy our families. So this is happening now, and it's going to continue unless we fight back. So I'm going to turn it over next to our senior staff attorney, Amy Whelan.
Thanks, Shannon, for that amazing summary of horrifying things. Shannon talked about the incredible dangers for people who are being summarily sent to dangerous countries. And he also talked a little bit about what's happening with detention facilities in this country. But I'm just going to say a few more things about that because it's really important what the Trump administration is doing related to that as well. And it's really important, I think, to understand how dangerous detention facilities are in this country, and that they are becoming more so. So we have known for years that serious human rights abuses happen in U.S. detention facilities, and that transgender detainees in particular face the highest rates of sexual assault and violence in those facilities. And there's two big things to keep in mind here. First, Trump is trying to detain many more people in this system, as Shannon sort of articulated. And second, he's intentionally removing all of the guardrails that are intended to protect LGBTQ people in these facilities or in this process. So, on the first point, Trump is rapidly opening new detention facilities with very little oversight, including facilities like Alligator Alcatraz in Florida. There are also reports that the government is identifying large warehouses around the country to try to use for detention. So private prison corporations are cheering these efforts on because they will operate and run these facilities. And in fact, two of those companies recently reported that their profits were up 13 and 18% as Trump seeks more and more contracts to warehouse people in these facilities or convert facilities into immigration detention. So these companies very directly profit from Trump's policies and actions. At the same time, Trump has issued directives to the Department of Homeland Security to house detainees, like Shannon said, only according to birth sex, which leaves many transgender women at very serious risk of violence and abuse. Institutions are also being directed to ignore federal regulations that are meant to protect LGBTQ people from sexual assault and abuse in these facilities. So one example is that the Department of Homeland Security removed a prior memorandum that it had that set forth the extreme vulnerability of transgender people in detention in particular, and required staff to identify and track those detainees and ensured their access to transgender health care. That memo has now been removed and is no longer being followed. And with respect to the private prison contracts that I mentioned before, Trump is also putting express language in the contracts with those companies that prohibit staff from even recognizing transgender people, much less identifying and protecting them. So those contracts specify that the facilities will not provide any transgender health care as well. And so they're basically government mandated directives to forcibly detransition people. At the same time, Trump gutted the division of the Department of Homeland Security that is responsible for reviewing complaints of abuse and violence from detainees. So it basically leaves people with nowhere to turn. We have known that immigration detention is extremely dangerous for years, and these actions put LGBTQ detainees, especially, and all detainees, at an untold extra risk of violence and harm. And this is part of a larger strategy of throwing these systems into chaos so that people will be too afraid to use asylum or other immigration protections, even though they're such a concrete part of this nation's history. I'm going to turn it over to Ming to talk a little more about our actual clients and what's happening with them and what we're seeing in our asylum and immigration project.
Great. Thanks so much, Amy. Um, yeah, thanks everybody for being on this call. Glad to have a chance to share about what's going on for our clients. I'm sharing this with Cara. I'm gonna mostly focus on what's happening for our clients in the affirmative asylum process, which happens at the asylum office level. So that means that these folks voluntarily decided to apply for asylum. They were not in any kind of removal proceedings. They don't necessarily have any criminal convictions or any contact with either the criminal justice system or the immigration system, but have decided to voluntarily apply for asylum in order to be protected from uh, being forced to return to their countries of origin, where almost all of our clients have faced extremely severe persecution up to and including attempts on their life. Um, probably the biggest um, impact on our clients right now at that level of affirmative asylum is that there is a freeze on all affirmative asylum decisions starting in December of last year based on a Trump executive order. The USCIS, which is the agency that adjudicates affirmative asylum applications, instructed all of its officers to hold all asylum applications. Um, Again, this is applications by people who are not in any removal proceedings, who have no motivation to lie or conceal anything about their background. They're not these aren't necessarily defensive asylum cases. Not that I'm saying that people in defensive asylum are necessarily lying, but there's no inherent reason to file for um, asylum unless you are afraid of persecution in your countries of origin. So that hold is creating a lot of fear and uncertainty for our clients, and of course is going to result in additional delays. Even after the hold is lifted, there'll be this huge backlog, which there already was even before this freeze. From our cases, and also anecdotally, another thing we are noticing at the asylum office is officers asking for a lot of additional documentary evidence, including evidence that's very difficult to find or obtain. Sometimes they're requiring our clients to locate documents from their countries of origin, which are very difficult to get. Sometimes they're asking them for documents from agencies in the US, but kind of difficult documents like getting a police department to confirm that they've not had contact, for example, with a person. Police departments are often confusing bureaucracies to navigate and will sometimes not even understand what you want if you're asking them for proof that somebody has not been in contact with them. In the past, officers would just base decisions would not necessarily require these documents. They are allowed to make determinations of facts, including the fact that a client hasn't had contact with the police through credible testimony from the client, from the applicant, I mean, and also other consistent supporting evidence. For example, we can often get records from courts saying that there's been no cases in that court involving this person. It's hard to quantify how much this is happening because a lot of it is just kind of happening case by case. We're just seeing in our cases an increase in this happening, and it's unclear the reasons why. But it seems to be a growing pattern, and I suspect it must be coming from instructions from further up the chain. We're also just seeing extensive delays in processing asylum claims, certainly, but even other benefits related to asylum. So this is for people who've already been granted asylum. Um, we're seeing delays in processing their work permits. We're seeing delays so not for folks who've gotten their interviews and are waiting for the decision. Now, of course, there's the freeze, but even before the freeze, we were seeing long delays between when a person was interviewed and when they got their decision. And one of the most likely reasons for this is understaffing. Uh, our understanding is that there has been a significant reduction in the number of asylum officers in the San Francisco Asylum Office, which is reflective of a national trend. Um, One account I heard is that they are at less than half the asylum officers they used to be at in the San Francisco Asylum Office. This is, it's hard to imagine that this isn't one of the major causes of these delays. And I imagine it's also creating a lot of pressure on asylum officers, which probably then kind of is a vicious cycle relating to retention. Um, I also wanted to add that a lot of these delays are happening in the context of this new fee that asylum seekers are required to pay every year. This fee is not waivable for based on income. So you have to pay it. There's no way to get the fee waived. And you're responsible for paying that fee every year that you are waiting for your asylum application to be adjudicated, even though the delays are not in any way caused by the applicant. It's essentially USCIS is charging you to wait for them to adjudicate your case. Um, it, yeah, it's hard to express how outrageous that is in the context of how fees usually work. Um, I think Cara is going to talk about this a bit more, but we're seeing similar delays at the immigration court level, and those numbers are a lot more public in terms of the understaffing of the immigration courts. In 2025 alone, Trump presided over the firing of nearly 100 immigration judges nationwide, which was about 1 in 7 immigration judges were fired in 2025. In San Francisco, the ratio is even worse. 12 out of 21 judges were fired in the San Francisco office. The San Francisco Immigration Court, they've announced that the San Francisco Immigration Court is in fact facing closure at the beginning of 2027, and cases are going to be transferred to Concord. Concord currently has 7 immigration judges total. 3 of the judges in that court were fired last year. So there's just a lot of concern that the administration or Trump essentially is closing off all paths to seeking protection, even as the folks who try to pursue those paths, as Shannon and Amy were mentioning, are also at risk. Even being able to access asylum is being kind of choked out of our system and putting people in danger and sending people into hiding. I mean, that's really the only other recourse. Folks are not, they're not going to return to countries where they face harm and death. So there's very little other recourse but to go into hiding in the US, essentially. So they're driving folks underground. Sorry to be the bearer of so much bad news. I will now hand it off to Cara, who I think has some additional difficult news to share.
Thank you, Ming, and thank you for having me here. These are extraordinary times for immigrants, for their advocates. I've been practicing immigration law for 25 years, and there's been ups and downs, and I would agree with Shannon that this is by far the worst it's ever been. I want to start talking a little bit about detention and also our response to detention. One of the tragic changes we've seen this last year and continuing now are the numbers of people being arrested, and not only arrested, but arrested unlawfully. The latest number that I heard was 75,000 people. That's going to go up with the addition of these warehouses that people were mentioning. I would say the largest part of our practice right now is filing habeas petitions in federal court. along with TROs, to get these people released. A habeas corpus is an old legal mechanism to ask a court to release someone who's unlawfully detained. And right now, our phone is ringing off the hook with people asking for help with habeas petitions, either the detainee themselves or their family or loved ones. I am glad to say that habeas petitions are working. The federal district court judges who are hearing about these unlawful detentions, and many of them are asylum seekers, as was mentioned earlier, people who went to court and got arrested at court, or people who were simply waiting on their case and went to an ICE check-in and were detained. The judges are not liking that pattern at all and are ordering immediate release for those individuals who can then go home and continue to seek asylum like they were doing before the arrest. There's still a lot of people in confinement that can't get a lawyer to do that. And the conditions in confinement, which have been touched upon, is something we hear about every day. I'll touch on one facility called California City. We're representing a lot of people in that facility, which is down in Kern County. And it's known for terrible conditions, particularly medical neglect, to the point where it appears that they're weaponizing medical neglect as a way to attempt to get people to self-deport, telling people that if you go back to your country, you can get medical care. And this is for folks who have serious conditions that are going untreated. Obviously, medical neglect at California City Detention Facility or any other detention facility very greatly impacts transgender detainees. 32 people died last year in ICE custody. The hopeful note is the granting of the habeas petitions, but the difficulty is just the numbers of people who are locked up needing help. I wanted to address asylum. Shannon talked about pre-termission with the third country agreements, and that is heartbreaking. It's a moral failure to be sending asylum seekers to other countries they don't have any connection to without letting them have their cases heard. Another type of pre-termission is a claim by DHS that the application is not properly filled out. They will look through the application and find some small omission. Even something as simple as the primary school's address is missing, and they will, which has nothing to do with the claim, and they will move to pre-termit on that basis. Some judges are going for that, and largely because the makeup of the bench has changed so much in the last year, with the firings, as Ming mentioned, of over 100 judges. So asylum, which is near and dear to our hearts at NCLR, had such extraordinary success over the years in obtaining protection for LGBTQ people. It is on life support right now. I think one of the last things I'll say is there's a real challenge with these third country agreements in terms of the time that people are given to respond. So let's say someone goes in and applies for asylum as a gay Russian male, and they've presented a great case about the conditions in Russia for LGBTQ people. And then at the hearing, the government says, okay, well, that's all fine and good, but we're going to send you to Uganda instead. They're not given a lot of time to make that case, sometimes even just days or a week. When the case had been prepared over months, geared towards one country, and then all of a sudden there's a surprise notification of the country that now they've decided to move the person to. So again, breakdown of the rule of law, breakdown of due process, and really on the backs of immigrants and LGBTQ immigrants. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Cara, and to all of our panelists. I know this is a very difficult topic, but I appreciate so much your sharing this information. I haven't seen this just put out so plainly, and I think that that is intentional. If we don't know what's happening, we can't protect our communities, and we want to be able to do that. That said, I wanted to just open the floor and see if there are any questions that anyone on our team can answer right now. If we aren't able to answer them, we're also happy to follow up with you directly. But the chat function is open, or the Q&A function is open, excuse me. I'll just give a little bit of time. If you want to ask a question, just want to give you space to do that.
Imani, while we're waiting on any questions, could I make one more comment?
Please, please.
I think anybody who is facing either an ICE check-in or a court hearing, immigration court hearing, or has a loved one in that situation, would be a good idea to speak to an attorney or a legal advocate before going to that. A lot of work can be done to prepare paperwork, such as the habeas petition, before someone goes in, that can get the person back out faster. And as I believe Shannon was saying, they're moving people around so much that if you can file it right away, you can lock in the jurisdiction with a California court. So I just wanted to mention that.
Cool. Thank you so much. Lots of questions about what people can do as volunteers. We are going to leave you with some things that you can do to volunteer and support your community. So we will get to that absolutely. Yep. It's a little bit more time if there's any other questions. Yes, we will be sending this recording out, so you will be able to share this. Absolutely. Anything else before we close?
I'm sorry, I see one of the Q&A questions is what best practices as legal advocates we can take to
Mhm.
clients. I think Cara already mentioned an important one, which is, preparing a habeas petition ahead of time, in case your client ends up being placed in arrested and put in detention. I think being prepared for those motions to preterm it, if your clients are in immigration court, being prepared to submit materials, even though it's this huge amount of additional work on those other countries, going over those I-5, sorry, not to use, going over those asylum forms with a fine-tooth comb to make sure they can't, preterm it on some pretextual nonsense about you didn't cross this T or dot this I correctly. It's just a lot of additional work. And habeas, of course, is like a completely different practice from immigration law. So often immigration lawyers have to seek help or develop their own expertise and skills to be able to file a habeas petition because it happens in a different court. It's a very different type of legal process. So.
And I would add too, if someone's going into one of these check-ins, or to leave a copy of your paperwork with a loved one, because if you get detained and you have all your paperwork with you, it makes it harder for an attorney to piece together the filing to protect you if without any of the paperwork. So that's just a practical tip.
Imani, I see a question too about whether attorneys can be trained to help with habeas petitions. Cara, Ming, is that something y'all could address?
I mean, I would say absolutely. I agree that a habeas filing is very different than what we as immigration practitioners usually do, but it is necessary to meet the moment right now to either learn how to do it or find someone who can teach you how to do it. The courts are sympathetic to them, at least in California, but in other states too. They've been granted in Texas and New York, and hundreds of courts around the country have granted habeas petitions for people. It's definitely learnable. I've had to learn a lot of it over the last few months because we just simply didn't need it like we do now. It can be learned and it can be extremely effective.
Thank you so much. I see another question. I'm not sure if we have an answer for this. Is there a shared bank of briefs that attorneys can use to address other countries when the government makes a last minute switch?
Shannon, are you aware of something like that?
Well, I'm thinking, I don't know about shared briefs, but I know there are resources on country conditions, especially immigration equality has some really good background resources on that. It's definitely worth reaching out to us because we may well have recently had to brief why someone shouldn't be sent back to a particular country. So yeah, I think there is Heartland Alliance too is another wonderful immigration advocacy group that I would try them. Yes, if you get in a jam like that, definitely reach out.
One more would be CGRS, Center for Gender and Refugee Studies. they have a lot of packets, I believe.
Questions about some other trains. And so we have a few things that we can share for you. So first, I just want to thank everyone for being here and for joining us today. I want to thank our incredible panelists for your remarks today, but for the work that you do every day keeping communities safe. We really, really appreciate you and so grateful. And I also want to lift up that there are so many amazing organizations that are doing life-saving work right now, and we have deep, deep respect for our community partners on the ground. We're thinking about our colleagues at Outfront Minnesota, our colleagues at Immigration Equality, some of our local partners like Oasis and East Bay Sanctuary. There's so many folks doing this really great work, and I know we've lifted up other places as well. And I want to remind us that while this is certainly an intensely terrifying time, we're not without things to do. And so, first, we want to remind folks to share this information within our community and beyond. Part of what is happening is the oppression that occurs is because people aren't aware of the scope of what's happening and what is actually legal and putting all of these things together. So this will become available. We'll put this on our website. We'll send this out to attendees. So please share this with the people that you are in community with. We want people to have as much information as possible and to be able to build on this and to actually know what's legal. And along those same lines, one of the questions that folks were asking are, it's important to be able to attend Know Your Rights trainings and specifically from legal organizations. It's critical that you know what you can do to keep your community safe, but to also be able to do this in a way that's safe yourself. And so, for instance, Immigrant Legal Resource Center is an incredible resource that provides these trainings and has done really amazing work in the past. So please think about them again, Immigrant Legal Resource Center. I also want you to be aware that, all over the country, there are local rapid response networks. And these are particularly helpful. Folks in the chat were asking, if you speak multiple languages or if you are an attorney or have special skills that way or want to be trained to have special skills. These are the volunteers that are in greatest demand, but finding ways to work within your community is really, really helpful. There's also ways to assist with really helpful things like driving kids to school and helping people get groceries. There are ways to keep people in our neighborhood and our community safer if we just want to show up for each other. And then lastly, to remember to call legislators. If there are things that you don't like, remember to let your elected officials know. And so just want to name all of those things for everyone. I want to thank you again for joining us today and remind everyone to please take care of yourself and to take care of all of us. If any of this was helpful at all to you today, you can find out more information about us. We're the National Center for LGBTQ Rights. You can find it at nclrights.org. If you have very specific questions about something more personal, you can reach out to us, and we are happy to help if we can. Thank you so much, everyone. Please, please be safe.